Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming to this recording. This is a recording of our Conservation in Action DeCal class at UC Berkeley. And let me briefly introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka. And she is a leading conservationist and dedicated to saving the critically endangered mountain gorillas of East Africa. Dr. Gladys was the first wildlife vet in Uganda and is now the founder and CEO of Conservation Through Public Health, CTPH. CTPH is a nonprofit organization focused on promoting conservation by improving the health of both people and wildlife to ensure their coexistence together. Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka's dedication to providing a vital example of conservation in action. So I hope you'll all join me to welcome her to our class today. Enjoy. Turning it over to you, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually speaking to you from Bwindi Impenetrable National Park, which is home to almost half of the world's mountain gorillas. I have a very nice view in front of me. I wish I could show it to you as the mist is rising in the morning. I've been working with mountain gorillas for close to 30 years, starting out as a vet student in 1994, and I look forward to sharing my journey with you. Later on, we found that after becoming Uganda's first wildlife vet, one of the first cases I had to handle led us to setting up conservation through public health. Because of our unique approach to conservation, I've been honored to win awards from Ashoka for merging Uganda's wildlife management and rural public health programs to create common resources for people and animals, and also to be a National Geographic Explorer, to get the Sierra Club Earth Care Award and Aldo Leopard Award. And during the COVID pandemic, I was honored to be selected to be on the WHO Scientific Advisory Group for the Origin of Novel Pathogens to try and set up frameworks to prevent future pathogens, future disease pandemics. I'm going to start off by saying how I became a conservationist. I grew up in a family of, I was the last born in a family of 6. So that's me at the age of 5 months on my mother's shoulder. Because as the last born in my family, I think, basically allowed to do what I want, because my mom always felt that, my parents always felt that my elder siblings would look after me. So I was allowed to do what I wanted. And I had an opportunity to do that, which I'm going to tell you about. My dad was a minister in the first government after Uganda gained independence from the British. That is him. He was often asked to lead delegations to the eastern part of the world to try and look for ways of supporting Uganda as much as possible. So in this particular photograph, he's in China looking for a way to look for resources for Uganda. And through this visit, actually, we ended up having a huge national stadium, plus so many other things that happened during that time. At that time, he was Minister of Works and Housing. Sadly, this is one of the last photos taken of the whole family. This particular time, this is all my family, my mom, dad, and siblings, because shortly after that, my dad was one of the first people who was murdered during the Idi Amin era, and because he felt threatened by people who were in the previous government. That's me as a baby. So we all felt that we wanted to continue his dream of a prosperous Uganda, and with me, it was through my passion for wildlife. My mom joined politics, and all my siblings have achieved a lot in their lives. I grew up with lots of pets at home. So my elder brother, who was slightly older my brother was 10 years older than me, Katerega, also liked animals, and he used to like bringing stray cats and dogs home. And so one time, I always felt like I wanted to become a veterinarian, but there was one special animal that really, I think, affected how I do things. This particular monkey was called Poncho. The Cuban ambassador to Uganda lived across from us, and they often used to come and visit my mother. So one time they acquired a pet velvet monkey, which used to like coming to our home, pull the cats and dogs' tails, steal food from the kitchen. He was a very naughty monkey. I was always fascinated by how his fingers and fingernails looked just like mine. And one time I was practicing the piano and I felt like I wasn't alone. And I noticed that Poncho was watching me through the window. And so I thought, let me see what he can do. So I left the room to see what he would do. He sat down on the stool and played one note with one finger. I was like, wow. So this monkey can also play the piano. I was really fascinated. And I think that started my journey being fascinated by primates. At the age of 18, I was asked to revive the Wildlife Club in my high school, which was a huge turning point in my life. It was so exciting that I didn't even study well enough for my exams, and I had to resit my exams in the UK to get into vet school in the UK, where they wanted 3 A's. And this was at Chibuli Secondary School, where I also got the 6 Sciences Award. One of the highlights of that particular time is I took the students to the national park to see the wildlife, and my mom actually helped me to develop these stickers, which I don't think I've ever really paid her back. But we went over to the national park with the students as me as the chairperson of the Wildlife Club. It was really exciting, but one thing that disappointed me is that there were very few animals. So few that there were no lions or leopards that could eat us, that's what they said. A lot of the animals had been poached during the time that they were ousting President Idi Amin. And so the Tanzanian soldiers who were ousting him were also poaching animals. Elephants went to Democratic Republic of Congo. So there was not much to see. You could only see a few elephants, a few buffalo, and we could take walking safaris. It was exciting, but disappointing. So at the end of it, I felt, why don't I become a vet who can also bring back the wildlife in Uganda? Having felt that I want to be a vet because of the cats and dogs at home, this was a turning point where I felt I could become a vet who also works with wildlife. While setting up the Wildlife Club, I visited the Wildlife Club offices, and I got to meet a warden who told us that, there are mountain gorillas in Uganda. He came into the office very, very excited, talking about the mountain gorillas in Uganda. And I thought, I'd like to go and visit them. And he said, no, they're not yet habituated. You can't get close to them. The first discovered population was the one further down here, where the very famous American researchers, late Dr. Diane Fossey, and actually before her, Professor George Schala, went and studied the mountain gorillas here in Rwanda. Diane Fossey set up a long-term study, which is continuing. And the Bwindi population, when they found night nests in the forest, and they took the samples to California, Dr. Oliver Ryder's lab in California, actually. He's now in San Diego Zoo. They found that the DNA was exactly the same as the one in the mountain gorillas in Virunga. And so they thought, these are mountain gorillas. And it's not difficult to see why. This distance is actually very short. It's only about 50 kilometers between the bottom of Bwindi and the top of Virunga. But it's been surrounded by roads, infrastructure, human development. And sadly, I don't think these two populations will ever meet. And so I was always fascinated about it, but I wasn't going to see them for a long time yet. When I got an opportunity to study at the Royal Veterinary College, University of London, which was amazing for me when I finally got into vet school. And in the holidays, they would allow you to work with an animal of your choice. So whenever I would come back home for Christmas, holidays in Uganda, I would try and set up something. And my first placement was at the Entebbe Zoo. It's about 70 years old. And this zoo used to be a very good zoo. The time that I went there, it was more like an orphanage. They just used to take in animals that were found, in the legal wildlife trade. And chimpanzees were some of the main animals they found. The chimpanzees came here because they would most likely be caught in DRC, where there would be the mother would be eaten maybe, and the baby is too small to eat. So they'll try and sell the baby across the border. People feel sorry because they look really cute. And then they end up in the zoo. If you notice, these cages were very flimsy. And the chimpanzees were normally around 2 to 3 years old, the ones that would come in. So they would come into here open the wire mesh when you're not looking, and run around the zoo. They loved running around the zoo. And then you'd have to bring them back in, and they love being hugged because they're missing the love of their mothers. Chimpanzees stay with their parents till at least the age of 4 years old. So it showed me how devastating the bushmeat trade is. So I finally got to do a study on wild animals, which was chimpanzees, again in Budongo Forest 1 year later. And I was looking at the parasites in the chimpanzees at the Budongo Forest Reserve. I got to meet Professor Vernon Reynolds when I showed photographs of the chimpanzees at Entebbe Zoo when he gave a talk at London Zoo, which was very close to Royal Vet College, University of London. It was just like 20-minute walk and often did things together. He gave a talk there, and Dr. Ian Redmond, who used to work with the late Dr. Diane Fossey, wanted me to show him the photographs. He had been to the vet school and done a presentation about gorillas together with a veterinarian called late Dr. Berkeley Hastings. So when I showed the pictures to Vernon, he was excited, and he told me I couldn't get to see the mountain gorillas yet because they're not yet habituated. So he said, I can come and study the chimpanzees at Budongo. He had been there in the 60s. And then when he ran out of money from Royal Geographic Society, he returned again 30 years later to study the chimpanzees with his wife, Frankie. So I went to Budongo Forest. It was such an exciting experience for me. Vernon, Frankie, his son Jake, and a lot of people were there to look after me as a young researcher. I was only 22. And my mom kind of said to them, look after my daughter. She was a bit concerned about me going out to the wild. It was a wonderful experience. I learned how to publish papers because he really edited my findings. It was great. 2 years later, I got an opportunity to go to Bwindi, finally, when the gorillas were habituated. The executive director of the national parks gave me permission to study the gorillas. And Dr. Liz McPhee, who was a veterinarian in Rwanda with the mountain gorillas, came to set up International Gorilla Conservation Program in Uganda and was my mentor. She basically supervised me during this time. This photograph was taken not at Budongo Forest, but when I got to Bwindi, because as soon as I got to Bwindi, I got a nasty cold and I couldn't go to see the gorillas, which was so annoying because I only had 4 weeks for my research. And I had to just get better naturally. There was no hospitals or anything. But I was able to go to the waterfall walk. And this photo was taken when I was at the waterfall walk. So by the time I got to see the mountain gorillas, my first mountain gorilla, Kachupira, I was like, wow, this is so amazing. Kachupira was on his own. Mountain gorillas are normally in a family. They live in a family. But that particular time, Kachupira, not being the lead silverback of the group, was at the side of the group. And that day we found him on his own. The rangers tried to look for the rest of the gorillas and they couldn't find them. So we watched Kachupira. He was called Kachupira because he had a broken hand, which happened during habituation. He was chewing on a piece of bark and very accommodating. He was so relaxed around us, which really, I was really amazed. And when I looked into his eyes, I felt a very deep connection. And I felt that gorillas are so majestic and intelligent, but very vulnerable. And I could see how I could easily make them sick because we got pretty close. We got 5 meters to Kachupira. My study involved collecting fecal samples from the night nest, similar to Budongo, except Budongo chimpanzees defecate in their nests in a tree, and when it falls onto the ground, you pick up the sample. But with gorillas, they nest on the ground, so we could go to the ground, measure the nests, measure the sample size to see which gorilla probably passed it, whether it was an adult male or female or younger ones. And what was really great about that is I was at the tourism site of Bwindi, not the research site this time. So I was able to understand how tourism is impacting conservation positively because a lot of people, it was creating jobs. Most of the rangers and trackers hired, 90% were from the local community. Some of them used to be poachers. So we call them born-again poachers. Also, at the same time, some of them were, working in the lodges. So it was really exciting to see that. So the tourists would sometimes invite me for a cup of tea to talk about my work at their lodges. So it was a very exciting time. But also my research found that the 2 gorilla groups visited by tourists had a higher parasite burden than the 1 gorilla group visited by researchers. And researchers were just a few. And I felt like maybe this tourism could have an impact on the gorillas, increasing their stress levels so that they can't cope with the parasite burden. And so it was a really interesting time for me. I never had people supervising me like like Budongo, because Dr. Liz McPhee dropped me up after 2 days, introduced me to everyone, and had to go. She was very busy, and being an NGO leader. And so I had to learn how to look after myself. And I'd like to say this to students, is that sometimes you go to research sites and they look after you, and other times they don't. But it's your self-motivation that keeps you going. And by the end of it, I had fallen in love with Bwindi, and I wanted to come back. And I felt like, the gorillas are so threatened, maybe I should become a full-time wildlife veterinarian straight away, and maybe I should become the first wildlife vet in Uganda. So I wrote to Dr. Eric Edroma. I shared my research report, told him what a vet does in wildlife, because there were no vets working in wildlife. And to my surprise, 2 months later, he sent me a letter saying, your job is waiting for you. So that was very, very exciting. So when I started at Bwindi, it was always a big deal whether or not I should treat gorillas or any species, because the conservation biologists who were there, much older than me, there were people who never touched animals, because in conservation science, biology, you're taught it's all about natural selection, survival for the fittest, so that the strong genes can continue in the population. So a limping warthog is the next move for a lion. If two gorillas fight, the stronger one should survive and continue with his genes, because it's normally the dominant silverback who mates with the females. But we did realize that the gorillas were affected because it's a very hard edge between the community and the park. People had already cut their forest habitat, and at the same time, we could give them diseases. And that's why Dr. Droma also said, look, we want to hire a vet anyway, and we're happy to hire you, because we are concerned that tourists can make gorillas sick. So the first thing we had to decide is, when should we treat mountain gorillas? We decided that if it's human-related or life-threatening, we have to intervene. This is one of my favorite gorillas, Karunji, with her baby. So this was one of the protocols that we set up. When should we treat mountain gorillas? And the first case came 9 months as soon as I started my job. I was told that the gorillas are losing hair and developing white scaly skin. So I called a human doctor friend of mine, and I asked him, what is the most common skin disease in people? I asked her, Dr. Catherine Sozi, and she said to me, she had also done her training in the UK, and she said to me, it's scabies, because low-income groups of people often get diseases like scabies because it's a disease of poor hygiene and sanitation. And so I thought to myself, if it's scabies, I can travel with a bottle of ivermectin from Kampala. It's a 10-hour drive to Bwindi, because I needed to take everything that I needed. And during that time, Dr. Richard Koch came to Uganda. He helped to set up the Kenya Wildlife Service Veterinary Unit. And I said he had come to Uganda to evaluate the veterinary needs for the Wildlife Authority, being funded by World Bank. So I just said to Richard, could you please come with me to Bwindi, because we have an emergency. Let's start at Bwindi. So he was excited to do that. He had seen scabies in cheetahs in Masai Mara, but it was the cheetahs that were visited by very many tow vehicles that had scabies, not the ones that were not. So we thought maybe if it is scabies, it could be due to stress, because this gorilla group was down to 4 gorillas only. But we went there, and Kachupira, who were able to dart, basically all 4 of them were scratching. The baby gorilla was the worst affected, followed by the juvenile. We couldn't really dart the baby because the mother was very shy. She kept away from us. And he was scratching even under the effects of the anesthetic, Kasigazi. So we treated him with ivermectin. He got better, but 2 days later, the baby gorilla was dropped by the mother, and we were able to do a very fresh postmortem. And even as the baby had died, the mites were still alive. And we really concluded it was scabies, and the baby also had pneumonia. So we started to wonder, was it really human disease? How did they pick it up? A few years later, the gorillas got a rectal prolapse. This wasn't a simple case of concluding that it's human disease. With the prolapses, we had seen some having prolapses coming out and going back a few times, but this time around the prolapse came out and stayed out. So we wondered, what is going on here? And they called me, and I had to, of course, do surgery to save her life. Although it was debatable whether this scabies was due to, this rectal prolapse was due to the gorilla picking up a disease from the community and straining to defecate. Some people said, don't intervene, maybe the prolapse is due to bad genes, and you're promoting bad genes in an already endangered population. But no one could prove that that's the case. So that the warden was like, you have to intervene. The tourists were upset. So they said, call the vet, this has to be done. And I realized that me as the attending vet had to make the final decision. So I amputated the rotten part, stitched back the rest, and Kahara recovered. Kahara recovered from the operation, and her being a female was another real reason why we should intervene, because she's bound to have 6 children in her lifetime. And in a population of only 300, this was going to be a lot. So she recovered from the operation, and she went on to have babies. Now, Kahara's the older sister of one of my favorite gorillas, Kanyoi, who I'll be talking about during the presentation, who ended up heading this particular gorilla group. So it was obvious that human-wildlife conflict was leading to disease transmission. This banana plant was actually destroyed by a popular gorilla group, Mubare Gorilla Group, the first one to be habituated for tourism. And I asked the farmer that, the person whose crop garden was destroyed, do you like gorillas? He said to me, yes, I like them because my children are employed by the park. Gorillas have enabled my children to be employed by the park. Some of the money from tourism is shared with the local community. That time it was 20% of the park entry fee. More recently, we added $10 to every permit to go to the community. But he said, but the individual person like me whose crop is destroyed, I'm not being compensated, and tourists visit gorillas in my garden. So that was a big deal. And I spoke to my bosses at the time, and he became one of the first members of the Human Gorilla Conflict Resolution team. So one thing, because people are making gorillas sick, I felt that it was so important that we need to address the health of people and gorillas together. But my One Health journey actually began when I was still working in the Uganda Wildlife Authority as a first veterinarian. Everybody turned to me and said, gorillas have picked up scabies, they could pick up other diseases. There's open defecation, people are not covering their rubbish heaps. I think you need to lead a health education program in the communities. So being the only veterinarian, everyone thought I was the best place to do that, because in veterinary medicine, you do public health. And veterinary public health is very similar to human public health. So I worked with a local designer, and we developed these brochures in English and the local language. And we went to, and we met 1,000 people in 8 villages around the national park. And so this is some of the people we met. I told them how the gorillas got sick. And we went together with the community conservation warden and ranger, who were hired to improve the relationship between the community and the park, talking about why the forest is important and how they can get the benefits from tourism. We also went with the district health assistant who talked to the community about public health. So at the time, it was actually a One Health team, veterinarian, public health experts, and conservation experts. So I told them what the problem was, how the gorillas got scabies, and I was about to tell them what the solution is, and the ranger touched my arm and said, let them come up with a solution. And they came up with much better solutions than I was going to propose for them, which was a humbling time for me, but very important. You don't tell people what they should be doing, you guide them to what they should be doing. And so a lot of what they propose is what we use later on to set up conservation through public health. They said that they live very far away from the nearest health centers, and they need to bring health services closer to them. If somebody gets sick, they have to be carried up these very steep hills to the nearest health center on a stretcher. And sometimes they get to the health center when it's too late. These little boys were herding goats outside the park. They were actually supposed to be in school, and they were just at the edge of the park where the gorillas were. And as long as you have people who are poor and have less than adequate hygiene, the people and the gorillas will always be compromised. They also mentioned, so they wanted more health education, but they also wanted to strengthen the human gorilla conflict team that herds gorillas back when they come out. And so then I got an opportunity to do a zoo medicine residency in North Carolina, which was amazing. And I was also allowed to come back home and conduct research. With funding from African Wildlife Foundation, I managed to get funding through the Charlotte Conservation Fellowship Fund, and I conducted research in tuberculosis at the Human Wildlife Livestock Interface. So I looked at TB in people going close to gorillas, and I also looked at tuberculosis in buffalo, cattle, and people, to try and see if people are picking up TB from cattle that graze with buffalo, or buffalo through poaching, and trying to prevent zoonotic disease in both directions. I also, of course, got an opportunity to learn how to treat gorillas with much more sophisticated equipment. So my clinical skills really went up, which was very good. And so during this time, I learned that the gaps in the public health system. I found out that in Queen Elizabeth National Park, there was somebody who watched you taking your medication every day, every single day until you got better. Whereas in Bwindi, that person wasn't there. So when they gave you your medication, you went home. After you felt better after 2 months, you're supposed to go back and get more treatment. And people often didn't go back because they were far away from the health centers. So 2 people died during my study, from one summer to the next. And so I felt that it's very important that we should incorporate tuberculosis also in our One Health approach. And so this is Bwindi Forest. As you drive, you get to a very hard edge between the community and the park. That's a big threat to the mountain gorillas, but another threat is poaching. And poaching, here in Bwindi, people don't eat gorillas. The people who used to live in the forest, the hunter-gatherers, the Batwa, it was bad luck to look in the eyes of a gorilla, so they would avoid them. But if they crossed over to neighboring DRC, the culture is that if you eat a gorilla or a chimpanzee, you can become as strong as them. And so in neighboring DRC, they could get poached. But in Bwindi, people set out snares for small antelope called daika and bush pig, and gorillas get caught in the snares or they get speared when they have accidental encounters with poachers, and all of this was affecting them. This is one of my favorite gorillas, Kanyonyi. I operated on his older sister, Kahara, a few years before. Kanyonyi was a gorilla that grew up all his life seeing tourists. So by the time he became a big silverback, he would like to frighten tourists to see their reaction. He was a very playful silverback. Kanyonyi is a gorilla who did not die of a human disease in 2017. It was more like natural causes. He fell off a tree, never recovered from the infection. Then he got into a fight with another gorilla that was trying to take over the group, which is normal. In fact, that gorilla is currently heading his group, Mariah. We visited him 2 days ago. And he never recovered. So when I put a post on Facebook that, Kanyonyi has died, we got a lot of tributes from over 300 shares as well, from people who often saw Kanyonyi. And the local community was very sad, and it just showed how far conservation had gone. So this is the beautiful view from my office, which I'm seeing right now. And inside here, you don't only have gorillas, you have chimpanzees and elephants and pangolins, which are all endangered. But you also have daika and bush pig, which people like to eat. You also have over 300 species of birds, over 200 species of butterfly, and it's a very important water catchment area and climate modulator. It's actually raining a lot right now, so it's very important to have these forests. We have an integrated program, wildlife conservation with a focus on wildlife health, community health with a One Health approach, looking at the health of people, animals, and the environment together, and alternative livelihoods, which we started later because we found out that many people are unhealthy because they're poor, and we started to address livelihoods opportunities that other nonprofits were not addressing. So we trained the rangers to monitor the health of the gorillas. We first have to teach them to identify the gorillas so that we're then able to know which gorilla is sick and follow them if they're not so sick yet and make sure that they get better. And we train the rangers to collect fecal samples from the night nests. Every day gorillas build a nest and defecate in it. So the rangers collect fecal samples from the nests every month of all the habituated gorilla groups. We do it all together. And we look to see if they have diseases that they're picking up from the community or the livestock, and we're able to address it. And through it, we're developing an early warning system for disease outbreaks. So infant gorillas, these are all the different dung sizes. The younger gorillas have a smaller dung size, below 4 centimeters, and the older ones have a much bigger dung size. So this helps us to also understand the group composition. So we built a gorilla health and community conservation center where I am right now. We first started off as a temporary field laboratory. We got funding from MacArthur Foundation to build this. And actually over here, the United States ambassador to Uganda Steve Browning and his wife Susie came to visit us when we got funding from African Wildlife Foundation, from USAID through African Wildlife Foundation. And we're actually very, upset that USAID has been dismantled because they're one of the very first donors to conservation through public health. And later on, we upgraded to the more permanent center with funding from Task Trust. And over here, this is our founder member, Stephen Rubanga, and here he's training 2 students who are looking at parasites and stress hormones in the gorillas. And they are from UK and America and Ireland. So through this center, we're able to regularly analyze samples in the gorillas, the people, and the livestock. This is a student from India who came over to also learn and study our One Health approach. So over time, we're trying to see whether, as community health is improving, our gorillas falling sick less often from diseases in the local community, such as worms. We're making sure that if gorillas are picking up intestinal worms, the community is dewormed, the livestock are dewormed, so the gorillas stop picking up these intestinal worms. We're also looking at things like giardia because they share water sources. I've had the giardia a number of times. It's really awful. You vomit and diarrhea at the same time. And we found that people were sharing the same water sources, like here, like cattle defecating here, people collect water from here, gorillas cross through this water source. And so we started to train community animal health workers to do conservation work. And we did a study with them. This is a student from UC Davis, Ryan Sadler, who managed to get a donation of fecal antigen ELISA test kits so that we could do this study. And we found that giardia had reduced over time, and we attributed it to improving community health. Cryptosporidia was still present. It's not as harmful as giardia. And the areas where it was present, we recruited more village health and conservation teams so that there are more people making sure people are healthy and hygienic and less likely to make the wildlife sick. And we also taught farmers to build cattle water troughs so they don't have to defecate in the water, which is shared with the people and the gorillas. And this was published in Frontiers for Public Health, which we're very excited about. This happens a lot. So this particular gorilla has left the park to still range in community land. He's a blackback. And because this continues to happen, we felt that we needed to involve the community in chasing the wildlife back. And so we engaged the local communities in conservation. This is the human gorilla conflict resolution teams who were training to collect fecal samples from the night nests when the gorillas nest in community land. They're the people who had gorillas back. And then on the right, we have women who engage in conservation through they visit people's homes, talk to them about good hygiene and health practices, try and make sure they all adopt hand washing stations outside their toilets. They talk to them about nutrition, sustainable agriculture, good nutrition. They also talk to them about how they can access ecotourism revenue. They also talk about family planning. And this is exciting because we're able to engage women in conservation and men in health, public health. So our VHCTs, as we call them now, Village Health and Conservation Teams, who are actually community conservation health workers, we started off in 2007, where 26 of them were conducting home visits. 10 years later, we had 270, reaching 40,000 people in 7,000 homes. We worked with a lady called Dr. Lynn Gaffikin, who helped to set up the family planning programs. And this is one of the health centers. And women were getting up and giving a speech in the community, which is something they never did when we first went out to carry out the health education workshops. And she's talking about the importance of having children you can manage. We show a family that has too many children. Half of them are going to school, half of them are remaining behind to chase wildlife from the garden. They're all sick. And when gorillas come out, they try and herd them back. And there's injuries and potential for disease transmission between people and gorillas. And then later on, they become poachers. The young children become poachers. The father takes them to the forest to poach. And then later on, there's teenage pregnancies. They're arrested. And some of them die. Whereas a good family, which has 4 children, they plan and have 4 children. They're all going to school, 2 boys and 2 girls going to school. When the gorillas come out, they call the Human Gorilla Conflict Resolution Team to herd them back so nobody's hurt. And later on, the boy becomes a ranger, the girl becomes a nurse. And this is really changing the behavior of the communities. The most popular contraceptive was the Depo-Provera injection. And over here, Rehema is giving a Depo injection to a community member in the comfort of her home. People come to Rehema's home and get an injection. It was very popular because people would walk to the health center and find an overworked nurse or midwife, and they don't get injected, and then they conceive when they don't want to have a baby. And we partnered with Family Health International to carry out this particular work. They trained our volunteers. We're among their 5 pilot sites in Uganda. It became a national policy to allow lay community health workers to give injections. And later on, they spread it to other countries where they're working around the world. So in 2008, the volunteers said to us that, we're not getting a salary, so can you give us livestock? So our third founder member, Stephen, said, why not it be a group activity that brings them together? So one set of volunteers got cows, others goats, and later on they reinvested in village saving and loan associations when CARE came along, promoting them through Bindi Mwengahinga Conservation Trust. And we're happy when they slapped our logo on the passbook, because it was an unintended outcome, and we've not had dropouts in the past 17 years. And so here, Hope is giving an injection to her. The lady who was speaking to the communities is now giving an injection. She's still doing this. And even without donor funding, they're continuing to do this. So we consider it a very successful conservation intervention. We also did a similar intervention in the DRC. And you can see here, people are much poorer. They have grass-thatched roofs, grass-thatched huts, a kitchen, a temporary kitchen. In Bwindi, as tourism has grown over time, we now have 28 habituated gorilla groups. Most people are now having iron sheet roofs, but in Congo, they're still having grass-thatched roofs. And even if it's a country that's largely Catholic, they still wanted to adopt family planning to reduce poverty in their homes. So I'd like to talk about some of the research studies that we've done that led to policy change. So on top of the Depo-Provera, which led to policy change, giving injections, which are presented at the Woodrow Wilson Center, we successfully advocated to the government to have a national population health and environment network, because we're doing a PHE approach, and a national One Health platform, which are all there because of the work we did in 2003. And so we're very excited to have changed the way that the government is doing things for the better, because they're also able to scale up what we're doing at Bwindi to other areas where we are not working. We worked with a student from Oxford Brookes University, Alison Haynes. She was interviewing tourists to see whether they're willing to put on protective face masks as early as 2010, quite 10 years before the pandemic. We're excited that the mountain gorillas are continuing to grow. The numbers are continuing to grow. And when I first started working with them, we had 300 mountain gorillas in Bwindi, and we counted, this was the first census we ever had in 1997. The Bwindi gorillas were discovered in 1987, so the first counting of gorillas did not include the Bwindi gorillas in 1981. So suddenly the numbers almost doubled when the Bwindi population was discovered. And we counted 300 in Bwindi, 350 in Virunga to make 650. I was excited to participate in this first census. And over time, we found that the numbers have continued to increase, which is very exciting. The last census was carried out in 2018, and they were dropped from critically endangered, 1 step away from extinction, to endangered, 2 steps away from extinction, because of the steady growth curve. And as much as there are only just over 1,000 left in the wild, they're steadily growing. And next month, we're going to be counting gorillas again, and we hope that the numbers will continue to go up. So how are we going to keep sustaining this success? There are many ways. Meaningfully engaging the community in conservation. We started Gorilla Conservation Coffee, which is a global premium coffee brand that we have to save gorillas through coffee. Whenever you're visiting the gorillas, you often cross coffee farms. And 2 days ago, we crossed a coffee farm. We are actually, this week, we're being filmed by a French TV station called Art TV. They're doing a film about coffee, and they're looking for unique stories. So they're doing one about gorilla conservation coffee in Uganda. And so as you cross the coffee farms, you come across farmers. And we found out that they were not getting a fair market or steady price, and they're still entering the forest to poach and collect firewood. So my husband said to me, who's the third founder member of conservation through public health. He's like, why don't we create a global coffee brand to save the gorillas through coffee? And so we did. And we were happy to find that the coffee at Bwindi is actually very good. It's at a high altitude, and it won 92 points when it was reviewed in Berkeley, actually, by Coffee Review in Berkeley. And it was among the top 30 coffees that year. So we're like, okay, let's get all the farmers to produce that very good coffee. So we're very grateful that we're able to have this opportunity. And the Kuntebe duty free at the airport is one of the most popular places. Every week they order new coffee. We suffered during the pandemic when there were no tourists, but we got a very good buyer in the UK, Vicky, who kept everything going through Manuro Beans. And it's available in the US at gccoffeeusa.com, in Kenya and New Zealand and Uganda. I'm going to end off by talking about one of the most popular activities in East Africa, which is gorilla tourism. Bwindi is one of the 4 most popular destinations in East Africa, along with the Volcano National Park in Rwanda, where you can also see the gorillas, but Serengeti in Tanzania and Masai Mara in Kenya. And this particular ranger is talking to tourists about staying 7 meters away when you visit. And in this particular, tourists are 7 meters away, but we found out that it's very rare. We conducted a study with a student from Ohio University in America and found that she did a study observing tourists and gorillas during the tourism visits. And in spite of being told 98% of the time that they shouldn't get close because of disease, they shouldn't get close, and 86% of the time because of disease, 60% of the time, the tourists go too close to the gorillas. Not even closer than 7 meters, but 3 meters. 40% of the time, it was the gorillas who broke the rules. So this became a big problem when the pandemic came along. So in March 2020, we successfully advocated for the upgrading of the great ape viewing regulations. And some of the research done by people like Alison showed that tourists were willing to wear masks. More and more tourists were more and more willing to wear masks. And so during COVID, we set up these guidelines, which are also endorsed by the Gorilla Pathology Specialist Group. You take your temperature, you have to put on a mask, and hand washing and disinfection was really emphasized. We also did a lot of education and testing. We tested gorillas and people for COVID. We trained the 270 village health and conservation teams to talk to the communities about hand washing, having hand washing stations, being much more vigilant. And the hand washing stations went up during the pandemic. And to call out the human gorilla conflict team, the gorilla guardians, who have to wear a mask as they herd back the gorillas. We joined the Ministry of Health COVID task force. We're the only conservation NGO there. And they were very concerned about the gorillas and chimpanzees. They didn't want them to get sick from COVID. And so we helped to influence the way the pandemic was being addressed, including delaying the opening of tourism until all the protocols were there for the gorillas and chimpanzees, and making sure that people who come to Uganda are tested, even if they're vaccinated, because gorillas in America had got COVID, even some from vaccinated zookeepers. So this really helped to protect the gorillas during the pandemic. But we had a setback. This particular gorilla, Rafiki, was killed by a hungry bushmeat poacher. He was friendly. He was called Rafiki because he was friendly. And as you can see, this poacher was not killing Rafiki for meat. He was killed Daikan bush pig. But when he speared a bush pig and it screamed, Rafiki charged to protect his family, and he speared the gorilla out of self-defense. So he went to jail for 11 years. And we had a meeting with the reform poachers. We realized it was important, even if gatherings were banned, but this was an important gathering, so they let us hold it. And they came with their wives, and they told us that they urged their husbands to enter the forest to get meat when there's no meat on the table. So it's so really important to meet everyone, not just the men, but the women as well. And when we went to check on the night nests of Rafiki, we found that they were fine, but they were very nervous. So over here, they were very, very nervous because they were now being headed by a blackback. And some of the females had left the group, so it had reduced from 17 to 11. And the porter was wearing a mask, saying in memory of Rafiki. Most of the community members were very, very upset that Rafiki had been killed. But we thought, as long as there are other hungry people, we could have another casualty. And so we started a new program at Conservation Through Public Health, which is food security. So we provide fast-growing seedlings to local communities to reduce hunger and poaching. Because when we distributed the first 1,000 questionnaires, majority of people said they're poaching because they're hungry. And so we realized that we needed to also look at that particular issue. And so during the pandemic, we started this program, and so far we've distributed to 3,000 households. And the poacher's wife was a major beneficiary. She's one of the first beneficiaries because she was only 22 years old with 3 children under the age of 3. So we told our volunteers to really focus on her. We now measure the impact of our work more systematically. So we found out that it's important to measure it more systematically. You may find that someone has a hand washing station, but they don't have a clean toilet, or they have an animal shelter, but they're not drinking bowl drinking water. So now we put them all in one set. And we made it that homes that have less than 4 out of 12 of the ideal indicators are red homes, orange homes have 5 to 8, and green homes have 9 to 12. And we're trying to move homes from red to green. And all of this has an impact on diseases in the gorillas and human-wildlife conflict. And all of this we felt was a better way of measuring the impact of our One Health approach. So in 2022, we did a baseline survey and found that only 23% of the homes that we're reaching were green. And in 2 years later, we carried out another survey, and the numbers had almost doubled, had more than doubled. And so which we're very excited about, almost tripled actually. And so over time, we're seeing big changes. And now we're better able to measure the impact of our work. As community health and well-being is improving, we're now trying to say, are gorillas falling sick less often from diseases in the local community? Is poaching reducing? Working together with our partners like the government, the Wildlife Authority, to see how this is impacting all the other indicators around the park. Responsible tourism is something that we've also continued beyond the pandemic. People are still wearing masks when they visit gorillas, because actually during the pandemic, the gorillas in the Virungas got less respiratory disease, which is very frequent there because it's a higher altitude. Because they were wearing masks, gorillas were not getting flu because people were wearing masks. And so we also tell people that they should visit community members, because once a community member meets a tourist, they're much less likely to poach. And we launched this policy brief on responsible tourism to great apes at the first Africa Protected Area Congress, which was in Rwanda. We did it in English and the local language. An International Gorilla Conservation Program was a co-author together with me at CTPH. And we also got tour operators to be on the panel. Praveen, who's really great advocate for responsible tourism to great apes, and Manzi, who's also owns Wilderness Tours. And we also had the Chief Warden of Bwindi Park, the Deputy Director of Rwanda Development Board, and Emmanuel Normand. Dr. Emmanuel Normand is heading an NGO in Ivory Coast that also promotes responsible tourism. We also developed this website. It's currently down, but we're going to get it working again, working with the University of Exeter when we got funding from the Darwin Initiative. We've hosted a student from Duke University, Nicholas School for the Environment, who did a study on the role of women in conservation. It's a very important issue. When I first started working with the mountain gorillas, there were no female rangers. Now 20% of the ranger force are women. When they see a woman can go out in the bush, carry a gun, do all these things, more and more women are motivated to go out and do this if they want to do it. And so this is Goreth, one of our most motivated female rangers. And she came out with us when we were training the first time and getting people to put on masks. And she's here actually with someone called William Mambu, who sadly passed on a couple of months ago. And he was someone who was helping us with the coffee. He came with his daughter and my son, Indigo. This was his first time to trek the gorillas as a 15-year-old. And so Hope is giving a talk to her community. And so it's very important to engage women in conservation. So what are we doing through this? There's the Leadership Council, of which I'm a member. We Africa, we're trying to mentor women to lead the conservation, to realize their leadership potential. We found that as much as women are increasing in conservation, hardly any are heading conservation programs. They have a limit, they have a ceiling that they reach. So this is a mentorship program which is helping them to be confident and reach for the stars. And we've mentored a number of women, 25 each year, to be able to do this. In 2016, we started strengthening African leadership in primate research and conservation. I have a feeling that I have to get back on the link.
Yes, we are still on. If you want to keep going,
Okay.
I'm not warning yet that we're gonna get timed out. So please
Okay.
keep going.
I'll keep going. Okay. In 2016, we developed the African Primate Society to strengthen African leadership in primate research and conservation, because often you go to conferences and there's hardly any people from Africa presenting, and yet people are presenting about primates in Africa. And so I became the vice president in 2017 when the first conference was held in Ivory Coast. The president is Ivorian, Dr. Inza Kone. And in 2019, I invited everybody to hold the second conference in Entebbe in Uganda. And it was a very exciting time. We had over 300 delegates, 85% of whom were native Africans. The Minister of Tourism was a guest of honor. The Japanese ambassador came. It was very, very exciting. There was lots of media. And through this, we're hoping that more and more of them will really get promoted in their fields, lead conservation programs, and not leave conservation because they're not giving opportunities to go up. In 2023, we invited the US ambassador. She actually was on holiday and wanted to visit the gorillas. So she asked if I could take her to the mountain gorillas, and we did, which was very, very exciting. You could see over here, there are many people in the forest. You normally have only 8 people per group. But she found out that many of her staff had never seen gorillas. So she brought them along. So half the visit, we had 8 people. The other half, we had another 8. And she became a big advocate for mask wearing. She went on Twitter and said, mask up for the gorillas. So when you have high profile people like that, they're able to promote the message and influence people to do the right thing. I took my mother to the gorillas when she was 70 years old. This is me when I was my last year at the Wildlife Authority. I took her, she was 30, she was 70, and it was a really exciting time. We also went with my aunt, sadly passed on a couple of weeks ago. And she was always scared about me going to the gorillas. She thought they would maul me. She really felt it wasn't something I should be doing. She was always encouraged me to become a veterinarian, but she was scared of the gorillas. When we went to the gorillas, she was like, oh, they're just gentle vegetarian giants living in a big salad bowl. So that was really nice. She wrote a book, My Life is Butter Weaving, about her. It was an autobiography. She was one of the first female politicians in Uganda who paved the way for many women to join politics. And it taught me to be a good mother. So these are 2 boys. I spaced them the same spacing as gorillas, 4.5 years apart, Indigo and Tendo, the severe outside our forest. And this is a lady called Zain Verji. She was interviewing me for CNN African Voices, and she actually said to me, why don't you write a book, which I eventually did. Tendo, the younger son, during the COVID pandemic, participated with me in a lot of trainings, and he wrote this article on COVID-19 and gorillas. And then when he turned 15, he went to the gorillas for the first time. We made it a big media event because very few Ugandans visit gorillas, even if they're here, and it's only 10 times less to visit than foreign non-residents who have to pay $800 and Ugandans pay $80. So we was on TV, national TV and in the news, and we're trying to encourage other Ugandans that when your child turns 15, as a rite of passage, take them to the gorillas. He really enjoyed seeing them. His older brother, Indigo, wrote a book, Zookeeper for a Week, and when he spent time at the zoo, and he wrote it during the COVID pandemic, 3 years later when he was at home. And this won an award in America, Moonbeam Children's Book Award. We're engaging the Bwindi community in conservation. These are children who are at Bwindi Community Primary School, which was built actually by tourists who would come and sponsor children. And they came up with an idea of putting up a rubbish heap with recycled bottles all over, because now there's so many lodges. And all of this is helping because there's rubbish everywhere. Baboons get into it, gorillas get into it, and this is really helping. They also are raising livestock as a protein source. Many of them don't have animal protein at home. And we found out that people are poaching also because they're looking for animal protein. Some of them, their parents are, reform poachers or things like that. So we're getting them to actually rear livestock so that they don't have to go into the forest to poach. I was truly honored to win the UNEP Champion of the Earth Award in Science and Innovation for our One Health approach to conservation. where I emphasize that we need more local champions because they're the people who become the decision makers for their communities and countries. And, you know, if you don't, like, for example, like the African Primate Society is a good example. But if you people are not leading conservation efforts in their communities, when they eventually become members of parliament, you know, they won't make the right decisions. We are currently having a big debate about cutting down prime forest habitat for chimpanzees, Bugoma forest, to plant sugarcane. So the more people you have in parliament who care, the less likely you have that issue. I was truly honored to be on the BBC 100 Women list in 2023 and among the 28 climate pioneers ahead of COP28. I didn't realize that our One Health approach was doing so much for climate mitigation and adaptation, and was excited to be recognized for that. We're really honored to have won a number of awards and to have received an honorary doctorate from my alma mater, the Royal Vet College, University of London, in 2023 for our work with mountain gorillas, and to get an award from the President of Uganda for our work as a conservationist and a veterinarian. What you can do, you can spread the word about our work. I'll actually be on CNN Call to Earth next week. Our work we're going to be featured for 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So look out for it. It's a huge honor for us. And follow us on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and more recently, TikTok. I know that's where many young people are, including my sons, who are now teenagers. Sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, make a donation through our website, partner with CTPH, do research and food training. This is Divya from India, who was really, really full of energy, and she was trying to interview the local community, buy gorilla conservation coffee, by walking with gorillas. This is a book that I wrote. It's a memoir about my conservation and leadership journey, and it's available all over America because it was published in America, but it's also available all over the world. And it's very exciting that Dr. Jane Goodall wrote the foreword for Walking with Gorillas. Thank you very much. Please visit our website, follow us on social media, and learn more about my work through Walking with Gorillas. And we're so excited that we've celebrated 20 years of CTPH, and we hope to continue to grow our programs, expand our work, expand the protected habitat for the mountain gorillas as the numbers are growing, and scale up our One Health approach to other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka. It's just a amazing pleasure to hear you speak about your whole presentation. It was amazing. I wanted to rep the book again. I have it in person here from when I met you in the World Conservation Network or Wildlife Conservation Network's Expo in San Francisco. So I was super excited to be able to read this. And it's just an incredible book. I mean, I can't say enough about how much I learned as a pre-veterinary student reading this book. It was just incredible to see all the photos too that you included and all the stories you have of all this time and experience you've had in the field. And before we go, I wanted to send out a few questions to you from some students in my class. I'm going to try and pick and choose some that we didn't really already cover during your presentation. But one of them that I saw was that how addressing community health concerns such as sanitation and family planning has directly contributed to conserving endangered mountain gorillas, in your opinion. So how does addressing community health through conservation through public health directly impact the wildlife that you're working with?
Yes, but that's a great question. And that's something that it's been an exciting journey to see how we've been able to do it. But we basically do a lot of behavior change, communication, and make sure that communities are more healthy and hygienic, so they don't pick up diseases like scabies, ringworm, preventable infectious diseases, which can also spread to the mountain gorillas and back and forth between the people and the wildlife. And so, for example, we tell people, they have to bathe often, they have to cover their rubbish heaps. We have use a pit latrine, have a hand washing station outside the toilet so that the children don't pick up, or they don't pick up diseases that, like if you don't wash your hands, they'll have all these diarrhea diseases. And then the gorillas, when they go into their garden to eat their banana plants or the bark of eucalyptus trees, they can put the fecal matter in their mouths, especially the baby gorillas, the infants and the juveniles, and it can spread through the group. So we try and talk to them about that. And we're finding that over time, as community health is improving, as there's much less open defecation, the hand washing stations are going up. We haven't had a scabies outbreak since 2002, which we're attributing it to the fact that communities are much healthier and gorillas are not finding dirty clothing on scarecrows. As much as people still put out clothing on scarecrows, it's not full of mites that gorillas can touch and it spreads through the group. And we're also finding that, as we're monitoring it by looking at the fecal samples in the gorillas to make sure that they're not picking up worms, parasites, bacteria from the local community. If they are, then we go to those communities where the gorillas have picked it up from, treat them. It's not enough to just treat the gorillas. You also have to treat the community and the livestock so that you're treating the symptom and not the cause. So yes, we're finding that over time, gorillas are not picking up like scabies, giardia went down. And as we keep improving community health, we're hoping that gorillas will keep on falling sick less often from diseases in the community. In fact, actually right now, our biggest issue is the tourism, because tourists are getting too close to gorillas, but we're trying to help by making sure people wear masks so they don't cough on the gorillas and give them flu and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fascinating. And also, I think what I thought was super interesting about conservation through public health is that, like, it was such a innovative approach to solving kind of the root issues of conservation issues, such as the hunger aspect, poverty aspects, empowering education and health education and access to resources. I always thought that was such a important angle for that. So I always thought that was really, really cool to see through CTPH. But another question we have here is, what strategies has CTPH used to empower local communities to be active participants in conservation? And what lessons have you learned in building trust with them?
Yeah, that's another great question. We remember the very first time I met the communities and I was going to tell them what the solution was to their problem. And the ranger touched my arm and said, let's hear what they have to say. And they came up with much better solutions for their problem than I was proposing for them. And I realized that my role was just to facilitate them and guide them towards solving this issue. That's a principle we have all through conservation, through public health. We don't force solutions on them. We help them come up with their solutions. And through the Village Health and Conservation Team Network, we empower the communities to be the ones to educate their communities. It's not like staff coming from another part of the country doing it. They go out there and talk about good health and hygiene, why it's important to be healthy and hygienic. And when they're leading these efforts, it's community-led efforts. Communities are much more convinced by their own community member in their village, rather than someone coming from elsewhere who they're like, yeah, you paid a salary, you're telling me what I should do. But this is someone in their community who's telling them this is the right thing to do. It's working for me. It can work for you. It can work for the whole community and can help us to protect the gorillas, and we can continue benefiting from them. So it's a very good link. And we need to protect the forest. They talk about everything. They also talk about the dangers of eating bushmeat, which can also make them sick. So it's really, if it's better that it's the community leading it than, like someone from somewhere else telling them what to do. And besides, there's no way we could reach 50,000 people in 10,000 homes if we had staff doing all that. It's just too expensive. But we actually have 430 community volunteers. We don't pay them a salary. We give them incentives, like livestock, and support their village saving and loan associations. But that's a lot more affordable than trying to hire so many people to go out there. So I think it's really, really working. And as they're promoting health, they're promoting conservation. And actually, we're finding that a lot of the conservation groups were finding it difficult to reach everybody. And when we started CTPH, there had been a study that looked at and found that as much as there had been integrated conservation and development initiatives since 1992, 93 when gorilla tourism began, the poorest of the poor was still going into poach. It wasn't affecting the poaching much. Poaching was still continuing, and they found that they were capturing only the elite in the community who were able to go to a meeting, talk about the benefits, and access these benefits. So they were only capturing the elite in the community, and so we realized that the best thing that we could do is to try and reach this elite in the community. Oh, she's left the meeting. Oops. Hey, Cosmas. Is everybody off?
Hello, doctor.
Okay, you're back.
Hey.
Did I leave the meeting? Did my network go off?
I think it might have been mine by accident. I don't understand what happened there, but it's still recording, so.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm just showing the photo when I was receiving an award from the president. I should have done anyway, you can see it there. But during the I was talking about the fact that I felt that when we started CTPH, we needed to reach those communities that nobody was reaching. They're harder to reach because they're right at the edge of the park, where you have to walk much further to find them at the edge of the park. And so we said, no, we need to reach them. And through our village health and conservation team approach, when we met with the local leaders and said, we want you to start this program. We don't want people and gorillas to make each other sick. Each of them selected. We sat down with the local leaders and they said we should have one person per village, just so that everyone can reach the local communities. And they selected them. It had to be someone who was trusted, someone who people would like to model their behavior after, someone who's ethical, and also someone who can read and write because they have to collect data. And so they chose those people. And we're glad that half of them were men and half were women because we're doing both health and conservation together. And we told those people, reach those homes which are hardest to reach. Over time, we found that they couldn't reach all the homes. So then what we did is we told them that they can reach, we increased the number of volunteers in each village. And so now all the village health teams, by the time we started this before the village health team system reached Windy, and when it reached, we decided all the village health teams should become village health and conservation teams. So it's gone really well, but through that process, we're able to reach the poorest of the poor and who are most likely to poach. And so it's very, very important with community-led conservation to be able to reach everybody. And through our approach, we're reaching everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. So commendable. I mean, really, that's amazing. To another question, reflecting on your journey that you kind of talked about with your book, this is a question from me, but what were your, you kind of talked about this in your book, but I was just wondering, what do you consider your biggest hurdles in establishing the conservation through public health program, and what insights would you share with aspiring conservationists?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say that my biggest hurdle at the beginning was convincing people on the value of addressing the health of people and animals together, and also integrating conservation and public health, because traditionally those are carried out separately, and donor funding cycles, and donor funding is very traditional, single sector. It's segregated. And so now you're telling donors, do it together. So when you go to human health donors, they'll say, we don't fund animals. I have to say that Bill and Melinda Gates was the first one we approached. Very ambitious. I'm like, we're starting an NGO. We're going to go to Bill and Melinda Gates. And actually, they were very honest and said, we don't fund animals. But now they're doing it. 10, 20 years later, they're doing it. But at the time, even as much as they did public health, they didn't see how animals come into it. And so then when you go to conservation donors, they say, we don't fund public health. But now they're doing it. More of them are doing it. We've convinced them, we've advocated to them through writing proposals to them. Then suddenly in the next call says, okay, something to do with health can work. you know. We also consider proposals that are addressing health. So there's been a lot of educating of the donors, and that's the fundraising has been the hardest. But over time, we've been building up our individual donor base, because people like you, Grace, who came to the WCN Expo, we are so glad that Wildlife Conservation Network is linking us to individual donors, because those are the ones who keep you going forever. And so good enough, they believe in us. So people like you believe in us. And then when we show results, then the institutional donors can come on. And so, yeah, it's been like that. It's been a journey. It's been a journey. I would say that because by the time USAID has been dismantled in the US for a few years, we were not receiving direct funding from USAID straight just now, but we've received it over the years, and it helped us, the NGO, to really get going. And we're finding that now, we evaluated and found that majority of our funding comes from foundations. Our largest funder is currently National Geographic, then individual donors, and then government is the least. And also when people come and stay at the camp, they pay money, which helps to run our programs, whether it's tourists or students. And also the Gorilla Conservation Coffee over time is going to be donating a donation from every bag sold is put aside to support the work of CTPH.
Wow. Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, I'm gonna buy a bag of your coffee soon too. I'm one near me. But I think there's only one more question left that we didn't really cover yet. The last one is for students interested in the One Health approach. What specific areas of study or experiences would you recommend to prepare for a career in conservation?
Yes, I would say a career in conservation. I'll kind of address that question. I got into conservation through research. And I think it's really helps students to volunteer, get a student placement at a conservation organization to really see if that's something that they like. We've had students who come and they've loved it, and they've gone on to do, conservation work, like the Indian student I showed in the presentation, Divya. She came when she was 19, when I presented at a conference in Bangalore, a conservation conference, Cambridge Conservation Science Conference. I was so impressed that half the audience were women, and they were like, some people had written books already. And then they are like, we want to come and see you. And they did. And Divya came. Her dad made sure she was safe. He brought her all the way to Uganda, told me, look after my daughter. Then he went back to India. They're very protective over their children. And Divya didn't need any looking after, actually. She was full of energy. Like, she was just like, and she got on so well with everyone. And later, Divya interviewed me on a podcast, like 2 years ago. And a year ago, and she said to me, I now have a podcast. She became a wildlife veterinarian, a veterinarian focusing on exotic animals, zoo animals. She's in Australia. She interviewed me on a podcast. She's just kept going, And then others you find, we've had a student who came and they went out to the gorillas once and they didn't want to keep going every day to collect fecal samples. And so Mr. Steven, our vet technician, founder and chief vet technician, was quite hard on her. He's like, look, no one's going to collect your samples for you. You should be you collecting them. And so she never continued in conservation. I mean, we actually had a paper published together with her because her professors, prepared her very well from the university she came from. But she realized that this is not for me. I don't like to go out there. It sounds glamorous, but you're hiking steep hills, you're very tired, Yesterday, 2 days ago, we had ants all over us. I don't know where they came from. And we were walking, we were like, what? And, but it's fun. Other people just love it, like others, they just love that. And others love being with the communities. Others are like, they're not interested in it. But so we've had some people who have continued. Currently, the veterinarian who we have on our team, Dr. Gloria Duku, she came as a volunteer. She loved it. She stayed with us. And so, yeah, I really believe that when you go out and first do research, like I did in the zoo, in Budongo Forest and Bwindi, and I felt this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, it helps. I think and also you get to see what the opportunities are as well. But generally, the first thing you have to know is whether this is what you want to do. This is the field of conservation you want to be in. because there are different fields of conservation. And once you feel that that's the one you want to be in, and once people have seen that you've had some experience, you've actually gone out, volunteered, done research, been involved in a field program, they're more likely to take you on because they know that it's going to be easier to get you to fit in with the team, orient you because you've already had an experience. So yeah, that's my advice.
Good advice. Thank you so much. I think that's all our questions that we had, but I want to thank you again so much for taking the time for this whole amazingly organized presentation. And I want to tell my students who are listening to the recording, please support with the book or coffee. I'll send links and B courses. And yeah, I hope you really enjoyed this presentation. I'm going to end the recording, but thank you, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka, again. So,
thank you so much, Grace, and we hope you come over to visit. And some students can also come and learn about our work and help us to improve on what we're doing through their studies.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay.